Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's show. It begins in a minute, but I just wanted to make something crystal clear before I start. I shot this episode yesterday, and I'm recording this today. And in editing it, I realized I might not have made myself crystal clear on an issue. Today's show is about, in part, civil asset forfeitures. And I talk about it to illustrate how the Democrats have failed to talk about an unjust criminal justice system in the age of defund the police. And instead of engaging and discussing this, they've decided to run and blame the base and then wonder why the base doesn't come out and vote for them. We know after Donald Trump's pardons that the Republican Party doesn't give a rat's ass about backing the blue or about law and order. They have nominated a felon as president, and the felon president is doing what felons do, and that is release and put into his cabinet people who are of like minds. So that's to be expected. This video is more of a recrimination of the Democratic Party, who's in the wilderness right now and trying to figure out how to succeed and who they're going to be in the age of Trump. And as far as I can tell, they're doing a bad job of it. There's reporting that Chuck Schumer had to take his colleagues into a room because there are two factions developing among Democrats in the Senate. Ones that want to work with Republicans and Trump and ones that oppose him. So the divide is real. But what I want to make very clear in this video is that I'm not against civil asset forfeitures per se. I'm against the use of them prior to a charge or a conviction. In this video, you're going to hear and see that law enforcement seizes people's assets and holds them well before they're convicted or even charged with a crime. In some instances, those victims never get their assets back, even though they've never been charged or found guilty of a crime. And just as a side note, this just came across my desk, within the last couple of days. This is the kind of stuff that went on in Ferguson, Missouri, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. They are not well known to the public because the Justice Department investigated this under Eric Holder because of the death of Mike Brown and what happened in Ferguson, which was Mark Brown, and of course George Floyd was Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the Justice Department investigated what was going on with those police departments and discovered all this police behavior that was detrimental to the community, all kinds of crazy stuff. And this is an all black community, or mostly black communities, and black and poor. And right now the reporting is the Justice Department is trying to get out of those consent decrees with the Minneapolis Police Department. Trump, or probably Stephen Miller, has told the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department to undo all of the criminal justice changes, I should say, that the federal government agreed to in the consent decree. And this isn't the first time Trump has done this. Back during Trump 1.0, Jeff Sessions tried to do the same thing in Ferguson. And what I mean to say is the government agreed to it, but more importantly, the police department and the cities, the local cities, agreed and came up with this consent decree with the federal government's knowledge and a judge overseeing this as well. And that might be something that has gotten missed in all the back and forth regarding Trump and his corrupting of our country. So for all you young right-wing African Americans out there who supported Trump, or young people who shout defund the police and want to protest and burn down buildings but didn't get your asses up to go to the polls and vote for Kamala Harris, this one is on you. So, and by the way, credit to Minneapolis. Both the police department and the mayor is saying basically, F you, Donald Trump, Justice Department. We're going to continue with what we agreed to, the consent decree that was entered into. Same thing happened, as I recall, in Ferguson, but I don't know if that remains the case. And I don't know if the Justice Department can back out of this. Again, a judge oversees this whole thing. But anyway, back to the point of this message. Today's video plays out as if I'm against civil asset forfeitures of all types. I am not. If you're a drug kingpin or a criminal charged and found guilty of feeding off of victims and taking their assets to support your criminal organizations, I think the government should take every bit of your money you have and all of your assets. But they should not do it until you are at the very least charged with a crime. Poor people and working people who are not charged and not convicted of crimes can lose their assets. Even having your assets held for a long period of time for a working person is disastrous and could ruin their lives. So that's what I want to make clear at the top of the show before we get started. All right, play the music. Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small. I want to thank you very much for joining me as always. And as always, if you like what you see and hear here, you can like and subscribe to the show. And you can click that little bell so that you're notified when new content is posted. That would really help the channel out. And it would give me the opportunity to get an idea of what you guys like and don't like. I think I already have an idea, but it would help out a lot. In addition, as you guys know, if you've been to this channel before, I'm going to read from a lot of different stories to back up my thesis of my video. And I encourage you to go to look at those videos as well, or read those articles for yourself. You can find them at Mastodon at mastodon.vtip.me/what you missed. And that is the show's Mastodon account. You can reach out to me, reach out to the show, comment there as well, reach out to the show there as well. On today's show, it's going to be a little bit different because I really have, this is the first show in the new Trump 2.0 era. And it is the beginning of, I think, a change that we're going to be seeing for generations. I think that this is something that is not going to go away as much as Democrats would like. It is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. The changes that are happening now are forever and are going to change. You have to realize there's a generation that has never known the Congress to ever work and function properly. New voters who have never known the debt ceiling to not be an issue. They would be shocked to know that someone like myself or others around my age never even heard of the debt ceiling until fairly recently. And there was a time where guns, shootings in schools were not a thing. But we're at a different time now. And Donald Trump made some decisions, made some commutations, some pardons, a lot of pardons, 1,500 pardons. And it's a gift to have Trump in this era. I think if you're a progressive, if you're a black person, if you're someone who has known America to be a different America, Donald Trump is a gift. And this video is a little bit about the gift of Trump, because the 47th president exposes the right's hypocrisy around black, the blue, but it's a problem for the left in the era of defund the police. And I want to say that, you know, and I'm talking about this from the perspective of someone who is a child of a police officer. So I have a certain experience, a certain idea about this, as well as someone who is of my age, my generation. I'm a Gen Xer, and also someone who has, you know, seen a couple of things and know a few things and come up with some conclusions. Particularly when you're someone my age, you should have come up with a number of conclusions. And this gentleman here, Michael Fanone, was on Deadline White House fairly recently. This was about 2 days ago from this recording, which is being recorded 2 days from when it aired, the day before it's aired. So this is going to air on Friday. I recorded this on Thursday. And he said something very profound on Deadline White House. And the quote is here: "When I was a cop, I saw the Constitution as an impediment." And one of the things I love about Deadline White House, Nicole Wallace's show, is that she is not afraid of getting to really what is at the heart of an issue. And she's not afraid of backing away, not afraid of having certain people on her show and willing to feature them and to speak honestly about these issues. And this was one of those honest moments that, and she's a former Republican conservative, and this was one of those moments that I thought was incredibly powerful and incredibly honest. And I want to talk about in today's video basically this notion of social justice and of policing in America. And as I said, I'm not a fan of defund the police. Many politicians and pundits and strategists I've talked about have run from it and blamed it for Kamala Harris's loss. Again, these are mostly people on the left. And I've been hearing this for years. You know, the term blue dog Democrat or conservative Dem probably has no meaning for some people, for some younger people of a certain generation, because they haven't had power in a long time. But when Barack Obama became president and we had unified government under Democrats, this is in 0809, the conservative Democrats were extremely powerful. And Amy Klobuchar, Claire McCaskill, Heidi Heitkamp, Ben Nelson. These names are probably folks that you don't know. Klobuchar is still in the Senate, but most of them are former senators, right? This is what happens to these so-called conservative Democrats. When things shift, people decide not to go for conservative light. They decide to go straight conservative. And these Democrats in red states were ousted. They're the first to go. And they're the first to chastise the base for things like socialism, defund the police, wokeism, etc. Folks who are your commentators or your political strategists, like a James Carville, famously went after defund the police, wokeism, and all this kind of stuff, as if that were to blame for Kamala Harris's loss. They claim Democrats don't know how to talk to working people, and Trump does. I think that's BS. But that is part of a conversation for another day. I'm going to talk about that, and I think I have in other videos talked about why I think it's BS, that this notion of not being able to talk to working class people. I don't want to go off on my tangent about that. I think I have before. I may come back to it later. Well, on today's show, I want to talk from the perspective of a son of a cop who was also a trainer and who knew and understand the problems with policing in America, particularly with black communities. I've said before, I did a podcast with my father called The World as I Like It to Be. I'm going to one day bring those episodes back, maybe in this format, maybe bring do a best of. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do it, but these stories in that particular podcast was done because I felt my father had a wealth of information and could talk about these issues because he was a trainer. He is a guy who knows policing, knows police culture. He was a cop. He trained cops. He trained bosses in the New York City Police Department. So when Fanone says what he says, and I'm going to play a clip from that Deadline White House, I know he knows what he's talking about. And I didn't need to hear it because I've heard it before from my father. But the gift of Trump is he has, and the Republican Party have decided it's no longer worth it playing these games with words and this whole notion of, being wishy-washy on these issues and what they truly believe. I have always believed that this is the Republican Party, right-wing conservatism in America at its highest form. It is not a perversion, or it is not, as some former conservatives might say, a dissolution or a change of it. This is conservatism. It's just amped up. It is not even amped up. It is where it was always going. It was where it was leading. And this idea of the right backing the blue, Donald Trump, the gift of Trump is that he has put the GOP on the hot seat with his blanket pardons of January 6 criminals. The GOP is being exposed as hypocrites, as they always have been, in my opinion. Donald Trump pardons a man who created Silk Road website. That site helped spread more drugs throughout American streets than the immigrants that he claimed was coming here from the southern border. But Trump also forces, or I hope forces, right-wing Democrats to cut the BS over the unwavering support of all law enforcement. These Democrats and their supporters claim voters don't want to hear defund the police. Democrats are running like frightened children from the conversation that could happen over policing in America, over the justice system in America. They don't want to have that conversation, but they want voters to still vote for them. They want blacks, in particular, to vote for them. What happened with black voters, right? Every time Democrats lose and black voters either don't come out or they vote Republican, it's always, what happened to the blacks? I don't understand what's going on with black voters, with black men. Why are they voting for Republicans? And that conversation is the real conversation that Democrats don't know how to deal with, don't know how to talk about. And I am hoping, because Donald Trump, this era that the Democrats are in right now is an era of rebirth, rediscovering who they are, opportunities to change. I'm not seeing it right now. I'm seeing weakness. I'm seeing a desire to run, to blame the base, to do all these other kinds of things. But the gift of Trump is forcing us to talk about the role of policing. And Nicole Wallace, to her credit, didn't shy away from it, from this episode on last week, Tuesday, when she had Officer Fanone on. And I hope Democrats are listening and watching, because they need to learn how to talk to the base. They need to know how to talk to rich people so that we can get, more wealthy folks on our side, other than George Soros, other than, a handful of rich folks in Hollywood. We need a stronger base of wealthy people so that we know how to talk to them. We also need to know how to talk to the base and stop running from these labels like socialism and defund the police and wokeism, etc. But Fanone does a service here, and so does Nicole Wallace for having him on, so that he could really break through the BS and talk about what is going on with law enforcement in this time, in the era of Trump. And I want to take an opportunity to talk about it and continue on the other side. Take a listen and a watch to this.
You've said in this program where you voted for Trump in 2016. A lot of organizations of law enforcement officers voted for him in 2020 and 2024. And just help me understand what part of the brain can compartmentalize what Trump sent his supporters to do to you and Brian Sicknick and Harry Dunn, and what they think would never happen to them.
Well, I've always said that law enforcement is a microcosm of society, and the same indifference that's affected or infected so many Americans has infected law enforcement officers as well. And I talked to one of my former colleagues in the Metropolitan Police Department and asked, what the consensus was amongst officers regarding these pardons. And he said, honestly, they don't really care. The only thing that they care about is the fact that they've got to work longer hours because, all of the activity over at the D.C. jail. And I think that's pretty significant. I mean, this is the Metropolitan Police Department, the department that responded to the Capitol to assist Capitol Police in protecting the Capitol. And these officers don't care. I think that it's a misnomer that law enforcement in this country are stewards of our democracy and stewards of our Constitution. These officers are just showing up every day for work and not thinking about the bigger picture. I never thought about the bigger picture before January 6th. I didn't see myself as a steward of the Constitution. In fact, when I was a cop, I felt my job was to put bad people in bad places. I saw the Constitution as an impediment. I certainly wouldn't subvert it, but it wasn't my friend. And I think that, this idea that law enforcement is going to stand in the way of Donald Trump and his lawlessness is absurd. Law enforcement is going to do what Donald Trump tells them to do because Donald Trump's in charge. The Department of Justice is not the the independent institution that we all think it is. It's Donald Trump's Department of Justice. Local law enforcement are not independent, community-oriented law enforcement agencies. We'll see in the weeks and months ahead. They are Donald Trump's police departments, and we'll see them used accordingly. And we won't see pushback. You're not going to see mass resignations. You didn't see mass resignations in the Department of Justice after Donald Trump pardoned hundreds of violent insurrectionists that assaulted police officers. Heck, I haven't even heard any commentary out of the Metropolitan Police Department's police chief, nor from U.S. Capitol Police's chief, nor from Pat Yost, the president of the National Fraternal Order of Police, who full-throatedly endorsed Donald Trump in his effort to regain the presidency in 2024 after having instigated an insurrection that attacked police, that killed an officer. The hypocrisy here is unbelievable. But, here we are. And, here we are.
Powerful words, very powerful words, very strong words. And like I say, he does a service by cutting through the BS and being willing to say what people don't want to hear about what is really going on, what the truth is. And, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Defund the police comes from the streets. but it identifies a bigger problem. There's a problem with law enforcement in America, right? Donald Trump is now the top, he's the head of the top cop, so he is technically the top cop in America, and he's a felon. And the right knows it, and it doesn't care. As long as law enforcement are hurting the people that are not their preferred group, they're fine with it. And Democrats are too weak to fight. They surrender. They don't talk about defund the police. They back the blue. That's their position. As a child as a cop and as a trainer for the NYPD and a member of DEA, I know for a fact that New York City Police Department detectives supported Donald Trump, the felon, right? This notion that somehow the police would be against Donald Trump, who would stand in objection to Donald Trump, is absurd. As said, are there good cops? Are there folks who won't break the law, who won't do this, that, and the other thing? Sure, I'm sure that there are. But if people are expecting mass resignations, as Fanone said, if people are expecting folks to come out who are law enforcement in mass numbers against Trump, don't hold your breath. And in some blue states, in some places, they're actively courting Donald Trump, particularly ICE, to come in and get involved. But Trump and his antics now force police all over to continue to defend Trump. I believe that they will, because as Officer Fanone said, they see the Constitution as an impediment to law enforcement. And while defund the police created a response to the killing of unarmed black men by cops, it got all the rounds on TV. But I don't think many people realize and know that the crooked cop stuff, particularly in rural parts of America, have not always been getting the kind of coverage that they should get. And there's one in particular that I don't think a lot of people have focused on or have talked about, but it came up fairly recently. I would say within the last 10 years or so. And one of those things, which is almost unbelievable that it is legal, is civil forfeitures. And these civil forfeitures have been abused by police for decades. And John Oliver from Last Week Tonight did a little episode on this that I want to play here because it was absolutely fascinating. And he does a service by showing us the hypocrisy, the craziness. Because let's not forget, this country was founded on the idea of an oppressive government, an oppressive king or queen oppressing its people needed to be stopped. That's why you had the Constitution as the rule of law, not an individual or a person. And it was extremely important for the founders that the people understood that they had rights and that the Constitution protected them, not a king or a queen or law enforcement or government. But you wouldn't know that if you talked about these civil forfeitures and were aware of what was going on in rural area. Take a look. This is from Last Week Tonight. This was a number of years ago, but it's important because it is prescient and it's not, defund the police. It's not about cops killing unarmed black men. This is about what goes on in a lot of places where people don't want to talk about, that pulls in whites, that pulls in poor people and working people, basically. And it's totally legal and goes on all the time. Take a look.
Civil asset forfeiture is really a mechanism by which the state and federal government can seize people's property without having to convict them of a crime. Most people can't afford to hire a lawyer to challenge it. It's really legalized robbery by law enforcement.
Because the Washington Post recently published a major investigation featuring stories like that of this man, who was driving from Michigan to San Francisco with $2,400 in cash that his dad had lent him to start a new job, when he was pulled over in Nevada.
I gave him my license and registration, and then as he was looking at that information, he asked me how much money I was traveling with.
Lee told him about the money his dad gave him, which he kept in the trunk.
He told me to turn on my air vents on high and roll up my windows and get out of the car because he was going to run a canine around it.
Dove didn't find drugs, but he did find the $2,400.
he said, no, I'm going to keep the money because I've concluded through my investigation here that you are traveling from Michigan to California to purchase drugs.
Many folks are unfamiliar with the idea of civil forfeiture, which is actually a case brought directly against a piece of property where you don't need to be proven guilty of a crime for your goods to be taken away.
Under civil forfeiture laws, your property is guilty until you prove it innocent.
Philadelphia officials over a 10-year period have seized more than 1,000 houses, about 3,300 vehicles, and $44 million in cash and civil forfeitures.
Holy shit. Usually when someone describes something taking 3,000 vehicles and 1,000 houses, they're talking about a fucking hurricane. Now, one of those houses belongs to the Soravelis family, and the reason for that seizure seems a little harsh from the outside.
Police arrested their 22-year-old son Yanni on drug charges, $40 worth of heroin, and claim he was selling drugs out of the home. Police and prosecutors came armed with a lawsuit against the house itself.
Exactly, because remember, the parents aren't on trial, the house is, which is clearly ridiculous. The only drug-containing house that needs a lawsuit against it is this one. You're on the edge. You're on the edge, house. You're this close. You're this close to losing your job.
So it's funny, and it is at the same time very disturbing enough to make it finally to the Supreme Court, because this has been going on for decades, for generations. And the end of civil forfeitures, the Supreme Court takes up the issue twice. Now, this is very interesting because the court shifts, right? From this is 2019 is the first case to last year is when the next case came up, and you can see the difference in how things are moving with the Supreme Court. So let me go into this. Is from SCOTUS blog, Amy Howe reporting, who is the excellent commentator on SCOTUS blog, and the article is called "Eighth Amendment's Ban on Excessive Fines Applies to States," and this is February 20th. 2019, and it says, quote, "The Supreme Court today ruled that the Eighth Amendment ban on excessive fines applies to the states. The decision is a victory for an Indiana man whose luxury SUV was seized after he pleaded guilty to selling heroin. It's also a blow to state and local governments for whom fines and forfeitures have become an important source of funds. The case dates back to 2015 when Tyson Timms sold heroin to an undercover police officer. He pleaded guilty to drug charges and was sentenced to 1 year of home detention. The state court also ordered Timms to forfeit his 2012 Land Rover, which he'd purchased for approximately $42,000. Timms challenged the forfeiture of his Land Rover as a violation of the Constitution's ban on excessive fines, and a state trial court agreed. An intermediate appellate court agreed and upheld that decision, but the Indiana Supreme Court reversed. It ruled that the U.S. Supreme Court has never specifically said the Constitution's ban on excessive fines, part of the Bill of Rights, which was originally interpreted as applying only to federal government, applies to the states. Timms asked the Supreme Court to weigh in. An opinion by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg explained that the, quote, historical and logical case for concluding that the ban on excessive fines applies to the states through the 14th Amendment, which bars states from depriving anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, is overwhelming. So this is now my commentary, and it seems absurd to me on its face. And even to most conservative members of the High Court who were questioning the Solicitor General who was defending this behavior by the state, that the Supreme Court of a state would need to be told that the 14th Amendment applies to the state and not just the federal government. That a Supreme Court justices of a state would need to go to the Supreme Court of the United States to be told, this also applies to you, not just the federal government. But that was back in 2019, almost 5 years ago, but we're not done. This is from the ACLU online. The Supreme Court didn't put a nail in the coffin for asset forfeitures. And this is by Emma Anderson, March 2019. And it says, and this is again right around the same time of the case being heard and the decision being made. And they come out with their assessment, ACLU. And it says, quote, the 84% of Americans who oppose civil forfeitures can be forgiven for having the impression that the U.S. Supreme Court ended abusive use of this practice last month in Timms versus Indiana, when it ruled that excessive fines clause of the Eighth Amendment applies to the states. Some media hailed it as a huge victory, but the celebration is premature. So while the court said that excessive fines clause applies to Tim's civil asset forfeiture case, it didn't say that Tim's forfeiture case violates the excessive fines clause. That means the case isn't over. Instead, it will return to the Indiana Supreme Court. That court will decide whether forfeiture of Tim's car violates the Eighth Amendment. So, it's not over yet. This was a case where it got a lot of coverage at the time, and it seemed to be a huge win for those who are against civil forfeitures. But it wasn't quite that way. It was remanded back to the court. So if you go to Wikipedia, you can actually find how this whole thing concluded, which is a pretty good thing. So it says, Wikipedia, Tim's case was reheard by the Grant County Court, which on April 27, 2020, ruled in Tim's favor based on the Supreme Court's ruling related to the Eighth Amendment that seizure of the Land Rover was an excessive fine and ordered the Land Rover returned to Tim's. While the state appealed the decision, it did agree to return the vehicle on the condition that Tim's would not sell or give it away as the case continued in court. The state of Indiana again appealed the decision all the way to the Indiana Supreme Court, which this time affirmed in a 4-1 decision the lower court's rulings that the fine was unconstitutional. It wrote, quote, today we reject the state's request to overturn precedent, as there is no compelling reason to deviate from the state's stare decisis and the law of the case. And we conclude that Tim's met his burden to show gross disproportionality, rendering the Land Rover forfeiture unconstitutional. So just to recap, the Supreme Court of the state decided to side with Tim's after initially fighting it, saying that the Supreme Court of the United States has already stated that this $42,000 car isn't to try and take it is not enough to satisfy the police desire to have that as restitution. And it just goes to show you how much the state and the local law enforcement really, really wants to take people's stuff. No matter whether it's right or wrong, they just want this car. And only gave it back under the condition that he won't sell it because they want the car, the $42,000 car, which is probably not even worth $42,000 anymore. But, they're fighting for it. And in the John Oliver, which I'll link to in my Mastodon, the John Oliver video, there's recordings on how these state and local governments use the money, because they already don't have much money. They don't have much of a budget, right? These are rural states in the South. They don't have much money to work with. So they use this money. They depend on this cash to help pay for stuff, right? So they want that money. So our civil forfeiture is gone. Is this case resolved for all time? No, it is not, believe it or not. This is from the NCSL Supreme Court to re-examine use of civil forfeitures. And this was May 1st, 2023, this article. And it says, quote, on April 17th, the court agreed to review Cully versus Marshall, a consolidation of cases filed against Alabama by people whose property was seized in connection with a crime. Alabama law allows for the seizure of property used in the commission of drug crimes and says property may be seized without due process if related to an arrest or warranted search where there is probable cause to believe that the property was connected to a drug crime. Probable cause is the operative word there. Probable cause is a very low bar. Very low bar. Property seized under Alabama's civil forfeiture law provides for the recovery of seized property by appearing in court and providing sufficient evidence showing that the property was not connected to a crime or by posting bond for the property. The plaintiffs allege that this statutory scheme fails to provide an adequate and prompt post-seizure hearing and violates their rights to a speedy trial under the Sixth Amendment. They also claim that Alabama violated their due process rights under the 14th and 15th Amendments. The 11th Circuit rejected those claims on appeal, holding that the precedent established in the case of Barker v. Wingo prevailed. Barker set forth a balancing test that courts should assess in determining the Sixth Amendment's speedy trial right violation. Those factors include the length of the delay, the reason for the delay, the defendant's assertion of their right, and prejudice to the defendant. The 11th Circuit determined that the timely merits hearing satisfied due process and speedy trial concerns and held that the actions of the state satisfied the remaining elements of the Barker test. The petitioners appealed to the 11th Circuit decision to the Supreme Court, which will hear the case later this year. Finally, SCOTUS, with a new set of conservative judges, and this is my commentary, by the way, but just to summarize, SCOTUS, with a new set of conservative judges, affirmed Cully versus Marshall with a 6-3 with, quote, an opinion by Justice Kavanaugh on May 9th, 2024. Justice Gorsuch filed a concurring opinion in which Justice Thomas joined. Sotomayor, dissenting opinion in which Kagan and Jackson joined. So where does things stand? So this is my final tips and takeaways. Civil forfeitures are an example of how police and law enforcement can abuse people. So we're not talking about cops shooting people. This is about police officer and law enforcement taking stuff from poor people and from working class people, right? We want to talk about how do we talk to working class people, how do we reach them. This would seem to me to be an easy lift, that the abuses of law enforcement includes taking people's stuff, taking their money. They don't have any money. They don't have much money. But what little they have, a police officer can, on probable cause, which is a very low bar, take their stuff. And in the case of Mulligan, which I didn't read here, but part of that case was about police were taking people's stuff, taking their money, cash money, cars, whatever of value, and were holding on to it for a long period of time, like, a year before they were able to get it back. You're a working class person and they take your car, your only car, for a whole year. You got big problems, huge problems. So when we talk about how do you start talking to working class people, particularly around issues of law enforcement, this would seem to be a way for Democrats to get in, right? Civil forfeitures are alive and well. They didn't go away. They haven't gone away in places like Alabama. The High Court has limited the reach and impunity of forfeitures, but they have not gone away. And in Cully, the High Court says, quote, the due process clause requires a timely forfeiture hearing, but it does not require a separate preliminary hearing. So because there's no separate preliminary hearing, again, timely, that's the issue. What did you consider timely? What does the court consider timely? Is a year timely? Is 6 months timely? Is a year or 6 months when it's your only car? Is that timely? If you have to go without a car? It appears as if the court has not and will not address issues such as property being sued and the owner defending that property, even if the owner did not commit the crime as outlined in Last Week Tonight. I didn't show that clip in the video. Again, I'll put it on the clip to the YouTube on my Mastodon so you can take a look at the full Last Week Tonight. But part of what John Oliver talks about is the absurdity of people suing a house, an inanimate object, a piece of property, suing it. And you'll have cases where the plaintiff judge or the law enforcement. It's a case against this piece of property, which is absurd. But that's what goes on in these court cases these days. But the court didn't address any of that. Civil forfeitures also remind us of the abuse the government can have over its citizens. This was something that greatly concerned the founders who fought a war to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. In my view, many of these police stops violate the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against illegal search and seizure, and they use probable cause as an excuse, which I've said already is a low bar. But the GOP don't care about that. Their enemy is Democrats and wokeism. They call it weaponizing government when guarding against disinformation, investigating the January 6th riot that injured police. They defend Trump for releasing criminals like the Silk Road founder. And they claim to back the blue against BLM and working class Americans who are disproportionately targeted by an unjust legal system whose officers openly support Trump. And somehow the Democrats can't defend against this. And it is a damn shame. Indeed it is. So the point of this video is that Democrats need to take this opportunity now to start figuring out who they are and what they're going to be in the time of Trump. It's an opportunity for Democrats to begin to reimagine and re-envision who they are, re-talk about or discuss, plan on how they're going to bring these issues up to defend against the madness that is coming and how they can win on that. As I've indicated in previous videos, that we have an election in Virginia and in New Jersey coming up. It's going to be an opportunity for Democrats to begin to test out their new plan going forward. And Donald Trump is going to give them very many opportunities to do some incredible things and to make some incredible flips. But unfortunately, if Democrats decide that they want to surrender unilaterally and try and work with Trump, as some Democrats have said, like Thomas Suozzi of New York, that is not going to help. And it's going to only make things worse, I should say. Thank you for joining me on today's episode, and you will see me on the next one. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching to the very end of the show. I just wanted to end this again. This is being recorded today. It's being uploaded. Some new news, and I just wanted to put out there more of the DOGE scam is coming to light. Axios is reporting, as well as other places. I think today they report what the Washington Post is reporting, and it turns out this DOGE thing is not going to be about cutting government at all. It has pivoted and become something of a play on updating the data and the software in the government, in the federal government. So they've actually renamed, under Obama, created digital office of the government to DOGE. So more and more the scam is coming to light. This is not uncommon when you have a president who lies with impunity and a party that supports him. Thank you, guys. See you on the next one. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.